welcome from my side. I'm Ralf Diemer, the Managing Director of the eFuel Alliance, and I'm honored to be the moderator of today's event. We have 90 minutes to fix the medium term of Fit for 55, so to speak, and we have distinguished speakers today. So without further ado, I would suggest we just dig into the program. And of course, we start with a short welcome note by our speaker, Monika Griefahn. And with that, we start our event. Monika, please.
Welcome to this discussion, which comes at a challenging moment for Europe, but one that makes our contribution more important than ever. After Russia's invasion into Ukraine, energy costs are skyrocketing, and as winter approaches, we even face a threat of possible supply shortages in Europe. At the same time, the European Union is determined to make a success of its transition away from the fossil fuel economy through its Fit for 55 package. As the West weans itself away from Russian hydrocarbons, that transition has become more important than ever. Yet the war in Ukraine has underlined the huge risk of dependence on potentially competing nations and the need for a greater diversity of green energy sources. We at the eFuel Alliance believe that we must avoid the fate of jumping from a frying pan dependence on Russia into the fire dependence on China, which has a near monopoly of production of the rare earths required for batteries to power e-mobility vehicles. That is why eFuels are so important in providing an alternative source of green energy. So today, I hope we can take stock of some of the most relevant Fit for 55 proposals under discussion and debate a few of the critical questions that arise. What adjustments are needed to ensure a secure yet affordable and clean energy supply for EU citizens and businesses? What will be the role of carbon-neutral synthetic fuels such as eFuels, and what is needed to unlock their full potential to speed up the phase-out of fossil fuels and significantly reduce greenhouse gas effects emissions? And how will President Biden's Inflation Reduction Act affect the ability of the hydrogen and e-fuel economy to take root in Europe? Thank you very much for your attendance and what promises to be an important and stimulating discussion on one of the most pressing issues confronting Europe today.
Thank you very much, Monika. And for the political perspective, I would like to introduce now our first guest and our first speaker. It's Dr. Markus Pieper. Welcome to our event, Mr. Pieper. He's actually sitting in Strasbourg right now because there is a parliamentary session in Strasbourg starting this week. He is member of the European Parliament since 2004. As you can see on the screen, a member of the EPP or EVP group of the European Parliament. He is the parliamentary secretary of the CDU-CSU group, which is the German part of the EPP. And what is the most important for our event today, he's a ranking member of the Industry, Research and Energy Committee, and in addition to that, also a member of the Committee on Budgetary Control. Mr. Pieper is a rapporteur on the Renewable Energy Directive, which is without any doubt one of the most important subjects in this whole Fit for 55 package. Due to time constraints, he agreed to give an introductory statement to us, but he cannot stay the whole event. Of course, we understand that because we know the schedules are very full right now. But with that, I would give the floor to you, Mr. Pieper, and we are very much looking forward to your perspective on the medium term of Fit for 55, so to speak.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President Griffan, Mr. Ralf Diemer, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the opportunity to give an input today at the eFuel Alliances. Really, it's an honor for me with the who is who in the eFuel business. First of all, hardly anyone will be able to give a reliable overview on the Fit for 55 legislation. Me neither. Everything is in process. And there are still questions to be answered. What about emission trading if CBAM does not come? Is one example. What next with the energy prices? Is our strategy of the expansion of renewables sufficiently linked to a plan for the diversified procurement of critical raw materials? All this in view of the global realignment of China and the USA. So Europe must be careful that we do not change from being an innovation leader to an extended workbench of the superpower states. Yes, we are working against it with new trade agreements, with legislation in the field of critical raw materials. What is missing yet is a strategy against the American attack on Europe's market leader in environmental technologies. American first, there is not a big difference between Biden and Trump. And we think that Europe must react with competition law and with very strong support for European SMEs. These are the keywords. And of course, international competitiveness requires a successful European energy transition. Fit for 55, Repower EU, actually the basic framework is in place. Customize ETS, new targets and pragmatic solutions for the expansion of renewable energies, a new energy saving target, and a lot of specialized legislation to achieve all this, from building directive, car regulation to industrial emission directive. I cannot go into details today, because today it's about your industry and it's about openness to technology. For me, eFuels are indeed a symbol for openness to technology. In German, we say, Wettbewerb belebt das Geschäft. Competition stimulates business. In other words, efficiency is achieved through competition, and each solution has specific strengths and weaknesses. Translated, this also applies to the fuel and drive systems of the future. You know, politicians have been focusing on electrification. Rightly so, because electrical solutions require significantly less green primary energy than the power to gas processes of the synthetic fuels. On the other hand, eFuels can use the existing infrastructure, the network, the storage, the filling station. Therefore, let us calculate the infrastructure costs of full electrification against, for my sake, the lower energy efficiency of eFuels. The balance then would be different. From my point of view, eFuels are therefore more than an option for air traffic and shipping. They are an option for heavy-duty transport, for the military, and for special application in industry. In all these areas, eFuels are the only sensible alternative to conventional fuels. Furthermore, they are an option for the huge existing fleet of combustion cars. And with the appropriate availability of renewable energies, they can also be interesting for niche models in the passenger car market. Also, assuming the availability of green energy, eFuels can also offer a solution for the heating market. With this in mind, as a rapporteur for renewable energies, I will continue to focus on openness to technology. As you know, we in the European Parliament have increased the CO2 reduction target in the transport sector. At the same time, we have significantly increased the quotas for synthetic fuels with sub-targets. However, in the trilogues, we haven't entered into negotiations on this issue yet, so we need another event from your side where I can say a bit more. But ladies and gentlemen, also some good news. The Commission is going to present a new draft of the famous Delegated Act on RNFBOs and green hydrogen. We are sure that they will present this new Delegated Act in the light of the proposed more pragmatic criteria from the European Parliament. If not, I announce to continue the discussion in the trilogue, combined with the idea to transfer the RED directive into a RED regulation. This would also speed up the legislative process considerably. So again, we have our opportunities to find a solution for green hydrogen and RNFBOs with a delegated act, I think within some weeks, hopefully 2 weeks, 3 weeks, in this range. Again, openness to technology, availability of green hydrogen also means giving eFuels a fair chance. They must remain in the game even when it comes to the review of the combustion ban in some years, and it will come to a review. I do not believe that the infrastructure for electrification, its development, is as feasible as politicians imagine it today. That is why we must also promote EU research in a technology-neutral manner. That means provide solutions that minimize the energy losses of eFuels in the process. Moreover, we have to say goodbye to the assumption that Europe can be self-sufficient in renewable energies. The Commission and Parliament have recognized that we need a gigantic import strategy and that this is the only way to have sufficient resources. Thus, we are now setting up a European hydrogen bank based on the EIB model solely for the financing and procurement of hydrogen to combine it with technology transfer and development aid, and fortunately supported by billions of private money. Moreover, the economy itself is globally active with thousands of projects in this hydrogen sense. Thus, I'm very optimistic that green energy and hydrogen will be available sufficiently in few years at affordable prices, if we do it right. Getting it right means that the Paris climate targets are our binding benchmark and not NGO ideology. We do not achieve the Paris commitment with a ban of technologies. However, we can manage it if we allow the competition of technologies. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, Wettbewerb belebt das Geschäft. eFuels are in a pole position. If we let them, thank you very much, and I wish you success for your meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pieper. So if this is actually true, then that would be really good news about the delegated acts, because you can imagine, and of course, I know that you know that we are waiting for that quite a while now, and that this is one of the subjects which is actually blocking investments in Europe right now. So that would be very good. I think two subjects which you mentioned are very important and will be also tackled by our distinguished panel later on. First of all, the developments in the United States, because it's really true. What is happening there could be a game changer in the global game on hydrogen and eFuels. And then, of course, the efforts in Europe, and especially on the file of Renewable Energy Directive. We highly appreciate your work there. We know that, especially with the upcoming negotiations or with the ongoing negotiations with the Council, it's not everything is very easy in that field, also due to energy crisis and other subjects, but we highly appreciate your work there, and especially your ambitious approach here. And of course, we very much hope that this will go through. Before we come to our panel, we have another member of the European Parliament who is willing to contribute to our event. It's Timo Wölken. He is not here physically, so to speak, but he sent us a pre-recorded video message. Timo Wölken is a member of the Environmental Committee of the European Parliament. He is the coordinator there for the S&D group. He is, has written an opinion on the Fuel EU Maritime Regulation and as well as on the revision of the RED. Of course, two very relevant initiatives here. We were talking about that already. We are very happy that he was willing to contribute. He is actually sitting right now as the chair in the S&D working group environmental committee, so that's why he cannot join us for this event, but we would like to bring through now his video and his opinions on that. Please.
You need eFuels? Yes. eFuels can contribute to the decarbonization of transport where we do not have other alternatives. Should eFuels play a role in the Fit for 55 package? Yes, and also, but not in all transport-related files. The biggest contributor of greenhouse gas emissions is road transport, and I do maintain my position. Massively promoting eFuels for road transport is dangerous in three ways. First, they are much more urgently needed in other sectors where there are no technological alternatives, like in the steel industry, for example, in transport and aviation and maritime. I will come to this in a second. Secondly, we do not have the quantities yet and won't have relevant enough quantities for street transport, so they can only make an absolutely insignificant contribution for a very long time. We would use up more than the whole hydrogen production capacity of the EU to only replace 5% of car fuel in 2030. And thirdly, they cost immensely. Moreover, eFuels are mixed into gasoline. This goes by 100% into the gasoline price. If they are blended into kerosene, for example, only 1/4 of the cost goes into the ticket price. Moreover, air passengers are generally wealthier than car drivers. I therefore believe that the eFuel ramp-up via the air mode is a fairer way. As I said, I am not in general against the ramp-up of eFuels. They are crucial, for example, in the maritime sector as well. I have secured a supply sub-quota for maritime in the Renewable Energy Directive. And as the ENVI rapporteur for the Fuel EU Maritime Regulation, I have received strong committee support for very ambitious RFMBO quotas. And also the ITRE compromise has proposed this, 2% in 2030, 6% in 2035. Unfortunately, the plenary only confirmed 2% sub-quota for 2030. This would be a first step, though, and will indeed defend this, and I will of course defend it in the trialogues. We count on your support, also to support from the Council side that these elements are held up in the negotiations. And let me quickly explain why. New technologies in fuels are becoming available and being picked up in other sectors. A similar transition towards renewable fuels has to take place in shipping in order to guarantee that the sector can reap the benefits of new industrial opportunities. The Commission's impact assessment carried out for this regulation has confirmed that the evolution of technologies can benefit both workers and existing companies, attracting new investments. But what I don't understand, the Commission concludes that even with mixed instruments, if their proposal is implemented, the main benefits of the innovation push will only be unlocked after 2030. But innovation needs to be boosted now, both for achieving our climate goals and for enhancing the competitiveness of the European shipbuilding industry. I also want to point to one important side condition that we should not forget. We have to think how to upgrade skills and invest in training and certification of shipbuilders, seafarers, as learning how to work with new technologies is currently included not included in training and education programs, nor required by existing regulations. So there are many fields we can work on together. As I said, I believe that eFuels can play a significant role, but not in all sectors, but I'm happy to discuss this further. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Timo Wölken. And there you actually see already the span in the discussion in the European Parliament. Technology open approach, a fair chance for eFuels, said by Mr. Pieper, and a discussion of use cases, where to use eFuels and where not, by Timo Wölken. I think that shows very good the different opinions we have here in the two biggest parliamentary groups of the European Parliament. We have now 3 actual fuel producers, eFuel producers, in our panel, and I would like to bring them in and also to comment on what they have heard. I would like to start with Thorsten Herdan. He is the Chief Executive Officer of HIV EMEA. This spring, when HIV Global, HIF is the company who is actually constructing a eFuel production, originally thought for cars, actually, in Chile. So we know that very well from the media. And Thorsten joined the company as its CEO this year. He's a trainee engineer. He studied mechanical engineering in Aachen. And in addition to that, he doesn't have only a broad experience in industry, but also in government administration, because before he joined HIF, he worked at the German Federal Ministry of Economics and Technology, where he headed the Department Energy Policy, Heat and Efficiency since 2014. In that capacity, he played a major role in drawing up Germany's national hydrogen strategy, so very familiar with the subject here. And before that, he was working for the German Engineering Federation, VDMA, so a very interesting career between industry and public service. So very welcome, Thorsten, to our event. Thank you that you are participating. Maybe in a first reaction on just what you hear, what comes into your mind there?
Yeah, right. Thank you very much. So I can be understood, yeah?
Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much for introducing me, and thank you very much for putting the two, I will not say completely different, as you said, but a little bit different opinions of big groups of the European Parliament into the picture. Well, you see the picture behind me. That's our pilot plant down in Chile, which goes into operation by December 20th this year. And that is just producing from that one windmill e-gasoline. And it does produce e-gasoline because there was a customer. And that brings me to the point as the first reaction. We are acting according to customers' needs. And we are a little bit puzzled when we hear politicians telling us that they know better what our customers would like to have. That is something which, to a certain extent, drives me crazy, which also did it when I was heading the drafting procedure of the hydrogen strategy of Germany, because I think it is extremely important that we do understand that industry is looking for customers. And once we have them, then it is a perhaps not too bad idea if we make use of those customers. And that now legislators are going to tell us which customers are good and which customers are bad is really something which drives me crazy. And I can only recommend to everybody that everybody in the European Commission and the European Parliament and the national parliaments, that they really should put their ear to the market and ask what they are looking at for the future. And I can tell you that there is so much different demand coming out of the engine for cars industry, coming out of the maritime industry, coming out of the chemical industry. You know, big companies in the chemical business, they are looking for renewable feedstock. and they will get it from us if they are going to pay for it. But also, if you look in the off-road sector, if it is the forestry equipment, if it is the construction equipment, if it is the earth-moving equipment, everything like that, they are heavily asking for, I call it now, renewable molecules. And if you look at that picture behind, you see a lot of nothing, which is the area we will continue to build wind parks and then convert that into something which we can bottle to send it to Europe. The only thing what we need is we need a European legislation in place, which is not the case right now. And therefore, I'm very happy as a reaction of Markus Pieper saying that he will not only work hard on getting that done very fast, but he is optimistic that we will have that very fast, because we all, as you said at the beginning, have to understand without any legislation in place, no project finance will take place, no final investment decision will take place, not in Europe, not in other countries around the world which are going to deliver the products to Europe. So that is very important for us.
Thank you very much. I mean, in addition to that, as you announced already, a lot of investments around the globe, actually. Your company wants to invest in, you are invested already in Chile, of course, but you are also announced an investment in the United States, as well as in Europe, in Germany, and maybe in other places as well. How is your take on the global situation here? Because we already heard about the development in the United States, which is of course important, but also China, of course, is an important player here. Are we still in the forefront in Europe, or what is your take in that respect?
No, we are sitting at the very back end of the train. I would even say we have already started to lose the train, not being able to jump on it again. Giving you one example, our first priority was, since we had that wind in Chile, to bottle that and to bring it to Europe via renewable molecules. That was the first priority. And then we got the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRR from the US. And we started already 4 years ago a pre-development. But now we speeded that up a lot, and we are building, we're starting construction next year, a 1.7 gigawatt eFuels plant in Houston, Texas. And that is now priority one. And that is just a signal that companies are acting according to the requirements which are there. And I was just the last 2 weeks down in Sharm el-Sheikh at the COP, and before that in Cairo at the DII. And there is huge demand of the MENA region of getting also their potential of wind and sun bottled into markets which desperately need it then. But if, again, we are not doing any type of legislation, we are missing the train completely, and we only can sit down and wait until we're going to die. Sorry to say that very clear, but we need renewable energy, as Pieper said, very much. And we do right now all that we don't get it at all. And that is something which, sorry to again say that so clear, is extremely stupid.
Nothing to be sorry about. Actually, that is why we're doing these events, to point out things as clear as possible. Last question to you in our first round, and please, we are about to enter into 200 participants. Please, if you have any questions, use the Q&A button and bring them forward. I will, of course, bring them then also forward to our panel. But my third question to you, Torsten, before we go on with the panel, would be actually, if you see the Fit for 55 package and the different parts we have in there, like Renewable Energy Directive, energy taxation, and so on and so forth, what would be actually the most important part which should be tackled as soon as possible?
The most important part would be the red with the two delegated acts. Why? Because that defines what is green. And as long as we do not know what is green, we can be relaxed in Chile, because whatever will be decided, we are green in any case, because we do take it from renewable energies directly, no grid connection, direct air capture and all that stuff. But it is not good for the rest of the world. So we need to define what is green and what is not. And we need to define in the second one, what is the possible and the suitable CO2 source we can use. And it would be really something, well, generations would laugh on us later on, that our CO2 targets cannot be met because we are lacking CO2. And to put it in a very simple point, I cannot at all understand why a CO2 molecule, which is in the stream of a, like say, cement industry plant, is a bad one to capture it from there. But once it has entered into the atmosphere and it is extremely diluted and you capture it then from there, the same molecule, it's a good one. Somebody has to explain that. I have no idea what the reason is behind it. I know the political reason, but one has to bring it very clear to that point. It's the same molecule, just captured at a later stage to a higher cost, and that then is a good one. No idea what the what that should be. So those two are the very important ones.
Yeah, very interesting point. Thank you very much. There are two questions in the chat, in the F&A chat, Thorsten, which are specifically to you on your projects you mentioned. Maybe you can look into that and maybe answer them via typing. Otherwise, I will ask them in the next round, of course, also orally. Thank you so far. Our next speaker is Amy Hebert. She is founder and chief executive officer of Arcadia eFuels, one of our newest members actually in the eFuel Alliance. She's having a very long-standing experience actually on the industry side, so more than 25 years of global industry experience and 10 years of leadership positions in refining, chemical and polymer industries. And after that, she decided last year to found Arcadia eFuels. The goal of Arcadia is to build actually 2 plants per year, quite ambitious. Each one should produce at least 75,000 tons or around 100 million liters of e-fuels annually to meet the growing demand for carbon neutral synthetic fuels, especially e-diesel and e-jet fuel to power the transportation sector. The company's first large-scale e-fuels plant is planned to start construction in Vordingborg in the southern part of Zealand, which is 100 kilometers south of the Danish capital Copenhagen in 2023, and start up of commercial operations by end of 2026. Before founding Arcadia eFuels, Amy held the position as Deputy CEO, Chief Commercial Officer of Halde Topsøe, which is also a member of the eFuel Alliance. And previously, she was Vice President Europe with Celanese and Global Vice President Catalysts with Albemarle. So a really interesting bunch of companies working in our business here. Amy is, by the way, also half American. So I assume she's quite familiar with American politics, and I would assume also with the Inflation Reduction Act. So I would pass also to you, Amy, by welcoming you very much. Just to give us your first take on what you heard already, and maybe also you can specifically stress also a little bit on the Inflation Reduction Act and what that means for our industry. Amy, please.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Ralph. I'm glad to be here. I'm actually 100% American, so I'm just living in Denmark right now. I've been in Denmark the past 5 years. So yes, I'm very familiar with the American politics, and also I've been in and out of Europe now for 15 years, so quite familiar with the European politics as well. I think that it's very interesting to see the contrast between what's happening in the US with the Inflation Reduction Act and how they're really encouraging producers with, green hydrogen tax credit of, $2 per kilogram hydrogen credit, or the $1.75 per gallon SAF tax credit that really makes producers want to move to the US and start producing sustainable aviation fuels, including e-fuels. I think another interesting piece is with Brexit. Now the UK has developed an advanced fuel fund where they're helping producers by funding, they're going to pick 5 sustainable aviation fuel companies and fund the pre-feed, feed 100%, and also 50% of detailed engineering and long lead items. That's another great place where producers like Arcadia would like to build. In Europe, of course, we're very advanced on our Danish site, but we are very much struggling to get funding, to get, the regulations sorted out so that we can achieve get the debt structure with banks and get the right lending that we need to have. We've also struggled quite significantly with securing development funding. So funding for the FEED and the feasibility and so forth. That's just hasn't been very forthcoming in Europe. And so I think that, Europe is at a disadvantage right now. I mean, we're certainly keeping our eyes on the legislation that we hope will pass in the coming weeks, because that will help significantly be able to have our project be more bankable here in Denmark.
So when you say, that's a very interesting point, actually, we always talk about regulation, but we never talk so much about money, so to speak. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that. Why is that is so more difficult to get the funding done in Europe?
Yeah, so
the banking system, or? Well,
it's a matter of not having government support, right? So we are certainly looking for investors at all of our sites, but the development funding is hard to get. And so by having government support for this development funding, when you build one of these plants to make eFuels, you have somewhere between 50 to 60 million euros of development cost. That's the engineering cost and the permitting cost and so forth. It's very hard for startup companies to all of a sudden secure this type of money. So if we want to see more sustainable aviation fuel projects or more eFuel projects built in Europe, we need support on this development funding. The financial community has not really been a part of development funding for any kind of chemical or refinery plants in the world. Almost all chemical and refinery plants that have been built over the past 50 years have been built by large companies. So they've done the development work themselves. So from a startup company perspective, it's very challenging. Now, there are a lot of startup companies building, smaller pilot plants. That's easier to get the funding for. But when you're trying to build a large scale commercial plant, the development funding is quite expensive.
Understood. Coming back to the regulation, so for you and when you say you're struggling from time to time to get the regulations sorted, I mean, we heard already about the delegated acts, but could you tell us a little bit more concrete what exactly the problem is, and what would be your recommendation to politicians or to decision makers how to fix that?
Yes, I mean, the number one thing we're struggling with right now, well, there's several, but the number one is the additionality and how things will shake out if, what % of the grid needs to be green to be able to be considered a green e-fuel. I think that question really needs to be answered, and that whole additionality question and the renewable energy, framework needs to be defined. The other piece of that, which is challenging, is, to build a new offshore wind farm, it currently takes producers, 7+ years to get that off the ground. We need more renewable electricity. So how can we accelerate bringing that on? And how do we get clarity around how to use renewable electricity when you produce e-fuels? That is still undefined. So that is preventing us from moving into PPAs and other renewable electricity sourcing, because we need to understand those regulations before we move forward. I would say the other confusing piece is around the, percentage of mandates going in 2030. We hear it's, maybe 2% now in 2030. But what happened, what is the penalty if airlines don't comply to the mandate? That still hasn't been discussed. What will they pay as a penalty for not, conforming to those regulations? We need to know that, because that helps sets the premium of what we can charge for e-fuels, for example. So, all these things need to be clear before we can reach the final investment decision.
One last question. When you compare that now to the United States, for example, setting aside the subsidies or the tax incentives you get, how is the situation there if you would invent or come to the idea to build up a production there? Is there regulation, and how does it look like? Is it, I assume it's less complicated, but in which way?
Yeah, I think the US is extremely straightforward. So now as a producer, we have absolute clarity on the different incentives available to us once we start up. So we know that we'll receive a $2 per kilogram of hydrogen credit for 10 years after startup. That's very clear. We also know there's a $1.75 per gallon credit that comes back to us as a producer. Now, that regulation currently expires in 2026. So that doesn't help us too much because that's when we'll be starting up. But, you know, the chances of that being extended, you know, are high, but we can work that out with our customers. So, and then there's not really any other regulations, right? You use renewable electricity, you use CO2, and I think the US is less strict on the CO2. They're fine to have CO2 coming from fossil sources. That's not something we want to do. We would prefer to use biogenic CO2 or CO2 from direct air capture. But my point is that the regulations are clear. We're able to get the project off the ground. We'll know our cost and we can move forward. And then the banks and other equity investors have of what we're not the case with our European plant so far.
All right, understood. Very interesting. Thank you very much so far. Amy, we come back to you, of course, later. I assume also with additional questions from the audience, but I would like to bring in now our third speaker, Luca Giansanti. He's obviously from Italy, and he's also representing a very prominent Italian company. It's ENI, so a very well-established and important oil and energy company in Europe. Luca joined ENI in 2019. He is Senior Vice President and Head of Governmental Affairs, dealing and sitting actually in Brussels. Right now, sitting in Strasbourg as well, since the whole parliament is there and the lobby work has to be done in Strasbourg today. Interestingly, Luca is a former diplomat, so I would assume he's able to speak to politicians in a very diplomatic way. He entered the diplomatic service in 1984 and had held various high-level positions there, including ambassador to the EU Political and Security Committee in Brussels, ambassador to Iran, very interesting right now actually, and political director at Italy's Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. He graduated also in political science, so he's no technician in that respect, but that's very good to have the different perspective also in terms of qualification. He graduated in political science actually at the Sciences Po and the Luis University in Rome. Warm welcome also to you, Luca, and of course we would be very interested to hear your perspective and your company's perspective on the current status of the Fit for 55 program, and of course what we just heard so far. Please.
Thank you very much, Ralph, for having me and us here. I'm bringing in this debate somehow a different perspective, as you mentioned, the perspective of an integrated energy company, which has in its portfolio, I mean, all technologies that, in our view, are relevant to achieve the 2050 carbon neutral, climate neutral target. I would like to start from a comment on the current situation, if you allow me, because I mean, we are, as you said, in the middle of the legislative process of the Fit for 55 package, but in the meantime, the situation in the energy sector has changed dramatically. And actually, it has changed dramatically also since the moment when, in the summer of last year, we all realized that the growth of the global economy following the pandemic crisis was still relying on coal, oil, and gas, and that the market was tight because of the limited investment made in oil and gas exploration and production in the previous years. This is a challenge. This is a challenge when you are aiming at achieving the 2030, 2050 decarbonization targets, because the current crisis requires all of us to, how to say, cross temporarily some red lines to ensure a greater coherence between what we do within the Union and the external dimension of the energy supply. But it also requires to make some trade-off between the short term and the long term. And these trade-offs are not easy to make. This energy crisis is affecting Europe in an unprecedented way somehow, because citizens and industries are suffering. It's imposing a heavy toll on our ability to recover the economy and to build a low carbon, climate neutral Europe. The problem is governments have been trying to find all possible measures to guarantee energy security, to shelter citizens from the growing and volatile energy prices, and to support companies. Still, governments in Europe do not have the same fiscal capacity. And this difference in fiscal capacity is adding an additional element, which is, how to say, increasing the fragmentation in our internal market. So what we see, not only as a company, but also as a citizen, is the need for Europe to give a European response to this crisis. A response that will be able to address both the energy security, but also energy sustainability and affordability. And a response being based on solidarity, like Europe did during the pandemic. This is, in our view, the background to be kept in mind when assessing where do we stand with the Fit for 55. Now then, if I may continue on the legislative process. This has already been mentioned by previous speakers, because as discussions are progressing on the Fit for 55 package, it is important that the industry, but us as a fuel supplier, are supported in the transition towards higher targets and higher quotas. What we need is clear and predictable conditions for long-term investments, investments that are already being made, are about to be made, but that are pretty urgent, because these investments are key. For us as industrial stakeholders, at the moment when we are looking at innovative ways to diversify the supply. Let's start by looking at the Renewable Energy Directive. There are a number of points which will need to be addressed in the trilogues, such as the overall ambition for the reduction of GHG emissions in the transport sector and the targets for RFNBOs. On top of this, and I'm sorry to repeat it, but it's so important, there are still a few pending items for RED II from the existing legislation. The Delegated Act on Additionality, the Delegated Act on the rules for calculating the GHG savings from RFNBO and recycled carbon fuels, but also, and it's important, it has not been mentioned up to now, the revised Annex 9 to the RED II, which is very relevant for the producer of biofuels as we are. Because, being a leading European producer of renewable fuels, it's really crucial to ensure availability of waste and residues, feedstocks, to be able to deliver on the targets and to acknowledge the contribution of new, innovative supply chains that will be able to deliver sustainable feedstocks to our biorefineries. Let me just mention that Eni was the first one to convert a traditional refinery into a biorefinery back in 2014. Now we have 2 biorefineries operational in Italy. In order to provide sustainable feedstock for those refineries, we are involved in agricultural projects with the aim to grow crops on degraded, polluted, or abandoned lands, while at the same time promoting the collection and treatment of agricultural waste and residues. Together with this innovative approach, waste and residues will then feed again into our biorefineries. Concerning RefuelEU Aviation and FuelEU Maritime, the openings shown by both the Council and the Parliament are going in the right direction. Yet, it is important that there is consistency between what qualifies as sustainable feedstocks under the provision of RED and under the provision of the refuel legislation. Once again, it is important to ensure the use of a broad portfolio of sustainable feedstocks for the production of renewable fuels to achieve higher targets. I was really glad to listen to Dr. Pieper at the beginning, advocating for openness to technology and competition among technologies. That is really a very crucial point for us. At Eni, as I said, I'm sorry for the cold I got. At Eni, we are among the top SAF producers in Europe, so sustainable aviation fuel producer, but we're also working with third parties to boost research on sustainable aviation fuels, focusing on a wide spectrum of technologies, including eFuels and, of course, hydrogen. Last point, let's look as to what's coming next. What's coming next is mainly the revision of the regulation setting out CO2 standards for heavy-duty vehicles. There, it will be important to look at all available technologies and consider their benefits on a life cycle approach, well-to-wheel approach. That's very relevant. Renewable fuels, again, such as hydrogenated vegetable oil, the HVO, that can be used in purity, are immediately available and can replace up to 100% equivalent fossil products in a large share of existing vehicles. Let me conclude by recalling what the previous speaker Thorsten said. It's important to look at the demand side, what customers want. And when we are talking about biofuels and renewable fuels, we really believe that there is a clear demand on that side to replace the fossil fuels which are now available in order to be able to move towards the full decarbonization of the transport sector.
Thank you very much for these remarks. Maybe two questions, if I may. First of all, clearly the energy crisis came, of course, after the Fit for 55 package was created. There are some answers created by the European Commission. You already mentioned that it's maybe not enough in terms of a common approach on European level. But my question would be, if you look now into this Fit for 55 package and how it is, how it looks like, do you have the impression that this whole energy crisis issue plays into the negotiations? Is there a significant change, or do we have the impression that everything goes like before?
But my feeling is that almost everything goes like before in the legislative process. What we see are delays in the schedule of the legislative process, delays which are somehow explained by the need to, in the meantime, implement emergency legislation, which is required to address the crisis in the short term. And where I see a risk, one of the many risks actually, is this tension between the emergency legislation, which is being adopted. We have seen a sequence of emergency regulations since last summer, addressing the short term and being temporary, and seeing the council as the only legislator. And then the long-term legislation, which is the Fit for 55 package, moving on without no major changes, but at the same time, somehow being affected by what has been agreed to address the short term. I'm sorry to be a little bit more complicated, but there is a risk all there, honestly. For the time being, what we see is only a delay in the timing, but that cannot be only a delay. Somehow, some of the emergency legislation has to be taken into account in the long-term legislation.
Understood. Yeah, thank you very much for that. And then maybe one last question in our first round, specifically to Eni, like a big energy provider, and of course, in the view of many NGOs, one of the bad guys on the field, because you are the companies, not only you, but you and your competitors are the companies who actually bring the fossil fuels into the world, so to speak, and make good money with that. Now, Eni is a member of the eFuel Alliance, on the other hand, which we are very proud about. You are, of course, there for a reason. Now, we hear very often from NGOs that the eFuel Alliance, and you can see that in your membership, they say, is an organization only to maintain outdated and old fossil-based business. What would you answer to that?
I mean, I'm not sure that we see ourselves as a bad company. In any case, believe me, much less than others in terms of being bad. We are a company which is developing all technologies, present and future, in order to decarbonize the economy and ourselves first. We are a member of the eFuel Alliance, as we are a member of Solar Power Europe, Wind Europe, Hydrogen Europe, Ocean Energy Europe, because our specificity is that we own all these technologies, and we push for all technologies to be able to contribute to decarbonization. Then achieving 2050 target is a transition. It's a long journey.
Sure.
A journey during which a company like ours will transform itself alongside with the European economy will also transforming itself. It's a long journey. There is a departing point, and then when you arrive at destination. We are fully aware that this decarbonization requires to use more natural gas than oil. And then that gas has to be more and more renewable and decarbonized. At the same time, what is needed is, I mean, what the revenues we get from all this, it's needed to invest in all kind of renewables. I don't think that companies like ours are the evil. Companies like ours are a player. Without this kind of players, you will never get to decarbonize the European economy.
I couldn't agree more. So thank you very much for that. But since we get this message very often also in the public debate, I thought it's would be very useful also to ask you about that. So thank you very much. We come now to our second round and, so to speak, our panel discussion. Please, again, some questions already. Some of them were also answered. But I would like to pick up on a question Rob Fearhood was asking and extending it maybe a little bit, because indeed NGOs like Transport and Environment in Brussels, but also as well on national level, play a very important role in the political debate. And although their arguments are more or less scientific based, that depends very much, of course. Politicians tend to listen to them very carefully, and you can see also in many positions here in the legislative process that they are very powerful. Now, from Rob's perspective, of course, very often the arguments they use are made up. But my question to the panel actually would be how you see this in Europe, but also maybe compared to other markets where you look in, and what would your recommendations to maybe us, the eFuel Alliance, but also to politics, how to handle this partly, I would say, mismatch we see between the different players from industry side and also the NGOs. I don't know, Thorsten, do you want to start maybe?
Yeah, of course. I'm not sure whether there is a real mismatch as such. I think there is a different thinking behind. There is a different way of they want to bring things to the ground behind that. I did mention that point that I do not understand why a CO2 molecule gets from a very bad one to a very good one just being brought into the air and then taking away from the air again. It is it is the question whether we believe in industry that they will find a way how to decarbonize the world by just giving them targets, clear targets, or whether we feel that they are going to, well, only look for their benefits on the back of society, on the back of CO2 emissions, and that is, I would say, the whole dimension on the ban of the IC engine. So they don't believe that industry is really going to do the right thing. And that is I would even say, a cultural thing of thinking. And what I realized during the time when I was in government, as well as during the time when I'm now being CEO of HIF-EMEA, is that specifically that debate on colors, be it green, be it gray, be it blue, be it whatsoever, is really trying to educate from the one hand side what is right and what is wrong. And industry, of course, is very much looking to the market. And if we can find a way that we, like say, as a token, define the CO2 footprint of the various products, be it the renewable molecules from us, or be it washing powder, or whatever it is. And we can clearly, transparently, reproducibly show that there is a certain CO2 token coming with that product. And it should be completely irrelevant how this is achieved, whether this is achieved with an internal combustion engine using 100% CO2-free fuel, or whether this is achieved by electrification of whatsoever type of application. I think if we enter into that sort of debate, then we could have a win-win situation for both. Climate protection would we desperately need, as well as the industry development. And taking the point from Amy on that, that it's tough to find money for the project development of the huge petrochemical plants, because that's what we are going to do. I think that is the case also because the financial sector does not know what the regulators will do at the end of the day. And though it's tough anyhow for a small and medium-sized company to bear that cost, it is almost impossible if we are living in a world and in an area where it's absolutely uncertain whether your product, which is green today, will just change to gray tomorrow, because somebody is going to tell you what the truth and what the wrong thing is. So that is something we have to openly debate, and I think then we will see it is not a mismatch as such, because people don't understand each other. It is a willingness behind that to educate people what is right and what is wrong. It reminds me a little bit, sorry to be again very perhaps rude to the times when we had the DDR in Germany. They also told us what is right and what is wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and actually educating people is also one of the purposes of this event. That's one of the reasons why we are doing this, and why we're doing this also with a broad social media campaign. But Amy, do you want to add something to that?
Well, I think it's important that we know what we're solving for, right? We're solving for reducing the CO2 emissions, and NGOs have a role to play. They tend to take an extreme view to really push everyone to get the right solution. So that's great. But I think the governments need to, of course, listen to that, but it doesn't mean that we want to reduce CO2 emissions so we go back and live, in the woods and eat berries and don't travel and so forth, right? I think it's important, especially for aviation. Less than 10% of the world's population has flown on an airplane. I mean, we believe in globalization. We think that it's important for the world that also people can travel, experience different cultures. That helps break down barriers for the future. So travel is important. So how do we do that in the right way? And that's where the legislation comes in. The stricter the regulations are, especially as a new industry, eFuels is a brand new industry. If there's so many constraints and difficulties, it's not going to get off the ground in Europe. So I would just, encourage the politicians and the regulators to say, okay, what is practical? as wind and solar started kicking off, in the early 2000s, there was a lot of government support to get these solar farms and wind farms in place. This is the kind of thing we need. We don't need a lot of red tape, but we do need to do the right thing. So there's got to be some balance there between all of this that we can sort out and get the industry moving.
Luca, you're nodding, so.
Yeah, very little to add to what my colleagues have said, but only maybe one thing. I mean, I agree fully. NGOs have a role to play alongside with governments and institutions, but they've been focusing for a long period on industry, on the energy supply side of this game to decarbonize. And actually, let's be frank, I mean, the energy industry and other industry sectors have already, since a number of years, started their journey towards decarbonization. So, and I mean, companies like Eni that has adopted a very solid, serious, long-term decarbonization strategy are really showing others the way. But then you need to look at the other side of the markets. You need to decarbonize demand as well. And that's where, I mean, customers do come in. And it's a challenge. They have to change habits. Now, thanks to the Fit for 55, I think also the EU legislation is beginning to address the demand side in transport, in buildings. That's where customers, families will be affected. And it's not easy politically. But also other sectors have to decarbonize. Agriculture is very relevant for reaching the 2050 carbon neutrality. So, I mean, we all need to join up efforts and we need to act on both sides, the supply and the demand side, in order to move all in the same direction.
Yeah, thank you very much. So we have one question from Peter Metzinger going to Thorsten Herdan. I just read it out quickly. The objection against point sources for CO2 is the fear of continuing dependence on fossil sources to feed those combustion processes leading to industry CO2 emissions. Peter says we can only counter that with two arguments. First, in the future feedstocks for all industries will be renewable anyway. And second, we need this to accelerate the ramp up, which under the line will lead to faster defossilization than with a political correct approach. What's your answer to that?
I think the second point is very true. The first one is difficult because it would mean that we already now, as of today, when we have 100% renewable feedstock to almost everything, which is tough, I would say. But the second one is absolutely right. There is no way to get a ramp up if we don't need the resources we have. And it would really be, as I said, something generations would laugh about us if our CO2 reduction policy will not be successful because we have a lack of CO2. And so therefore, for me, it's quite clear. Let's use the ramp up, and why not using some sort of a ramp up time, saying we, for the next, I don't know what, 5 years, for the next then coming 15 years for a project finance perspective, the use of those CO2 sources. Or we can also ask ourselves what could be done, like for the cement industry, in order to replace the production of cement with something different. So then the answer will be no cement. Yeah? And that would mean there is a certain way which will, well, not a certain way, there is a certain thing which will come to the very clear point. We need to have negative emissions at some point of time. So there is no way, to my mind, that we will get direct air capture into place. And that will then replace phase by phase the need of using industrial CO2. But up and until we are at that stage, it is simply a disaster that we forbid doing that in Europe. Others don't do that. So again, our plant in Texas, 1.7 gigawatts, of electrolyzer, 1.3, 1.4 million tons of green methanol going into operation 26 uses the Danbury pipeline. So the US market is sucking all of that equipment, and we won't see any electrolyzer going into Europe if we continue of debating and not putting legislation in place. I think that has to be made very clear to the European policymakers. They have to understand that, and if they have understood it, they have to say, yes, exactly, that's what I want to have. No equipment anymore into Europe, no renewable electrons into Europe, because I'm self-sustained with what I can do in Europe on my own. And I can only say good luck with that procedure.
Thank you very much for that. In addition to that, maybe a question to Amy from Howard Gervin. It's a little bit of a broad question, but also a philosophical one, I would say. Which will be the stronger motivator for industry to act? Forcing regulations, in brackets EU approach, or investor greed, in brackets US approach?
Well, again, I believe in the supply demand model, and also, solving the problem that we're here to solve, which is reducing CO2 emissions. That can be achieved both ways. But again, the issue with eFuels today and any other lower carbon fuels is that they're more expensive than the traditional crude oil based fuels. So the way that the industry will buy these fuels is if that they're the same cost, or they offer some benefits that they're willing to pay for, right? So the airline industry has that initiative because people want to fly, and they want to fly in a carbon neutral way. So they can afford to pay a little premium for eFuels to be able to offer their customers a carbon neutral flying experience. So that kind of kicks into the mandate side. So if you mandate that in addition, then that market will take off. However, it doesn't mean that producers will build in Europe to supply the mandates in Europe. It could be that producers produce in Chile, like HIF is doing, in the US, like we're doing and HIF is doing. So that's where that's the difference to me. So mandates have to do with the market, but then if you want to have production along with the market, then you may need some incentives. So you almost need both to have a perfect world. The US doesn't have mandates per se, but they have targets of carbon neutral flying. And I think that the general awareness of trying to reduce CO2 emissions is helpful in the US. But mandates in Europe will be great. But again, the mandates have to come with a penalty that's clearly understood. And that is where the premium will come into play. So, yeah, there's no right or wrong answer, but the combination of both would be ideal.
It's maybe actually true. It's maybe a mixture of both, right? What we call in carrot and stick policy. In addition to that, maybe another question concerning the Inflation Reduction Act to Luca, because what we also have in place in Europe under discussion right now are proposals on the Energy Taxation Directive. Of course, the energy taxation system in Europe is outdated, but could, on the other hand, also be a big driver for investments into e-fuels as well. And our Minister, Robert Habeck, actually just today expressed his concerns about the US approach. It could be actually an European answer to that. What do you think about that?
Ralph, no, I agree about the concern about the US legislation. At the same time, I have to say we're also confident that through a transatlantic dialogue, that they will find a way to address it, because there are also issues of compliance with the WTO rules and so on. So there is a lot at stake. But energy taxation directive, let's hope it will work in the right direction in order to boost and support investments. I have to say that, I mean, discussions within the council are slow for the time being. We would need to know as soon as possible, I mean, what the outcome will be, because that will be very, very relevant. That's a powerful tool together with others. And allow me also to join to the answer to the previous question. Pressure from Brussels, regulation, it's very important. Honestly, let's take the example of a company like Eni. We are a global company, but our decarbonization strategy is fully based on the Green Deal. I mean, we took the Green Deal and we brought it into the company to be the base in terms of targets, commitments, achievements. And this despite the fact that most of our business is out of Europe. So that's very relevant. Shareholders are relevant, of course, because our shareholders are asking us to move away from slowly through a transition from fossil fuels and to reach by 2050 the net zero. And also it's important our relationship with a lot of stakeholders. I mean, local, global, institutional and others, but also local communities. All this is made up. So, I mean, companies like ours have received, not from today, but from a number of years already, a strong push to decarbonize. Again, we are one side of the story. Then there is still the other side of the story. Customers, the demand side, and so
on. There is one question from Eli Winkler. It's going specifically on possible improvements of the Fischer-Tropsch process, but I would maybe like to broaden the question a little bit, because what we also see in the debate we have right now is that very often when it comes to e-fuels and the value chain of e-fuels, we have a debate based on the current state of play without taking into account potential technical improvements and development improvements, which we will, of course, gain during the time, and especially when we have scale effect. So Thorsten mentioned carbon capture, sorry. But it's of course about efficiency and this whole efficiency debate, efficiency of electrolyzers. And it's of course also about these different production routes we have. So I would love to stress a little bit more on this really technology interesting value chain we are representing also, and what possibilities are there. Maybe Thorsten and Amy, you could stress a little bit on this factor.
Yeah, well, again, it's the question of the market. We all know the advantages and disadvantages of the various routes. Fischer-Tropsch has a different type of fractionation at the end of the game as the methanol route. Fischer-Tropsch has a different possibility of using it in off-grid applications as the methanol route. There are companies like Eneratech which are going to combine the positive effects that shows only that there's a huge way of getting new technologies in place. We see right now various companies which are doing the methanol to jet pathway technologies. I think the call it old company of Amy is very advanced in that. We have seen already at the end of the 70s during the oil crisis, one of the first methanol to gasoline plants installed in New Zealand because they were lacking gasoline for the agricultural industry. And it showed there is that was not renewable, of course, that was coal-based, but it shows there is so much development in place. But what we need to do, and that is my urgent request, we need to start with something. We cannot wait and wait for the next thing and the next more efficient one and the next more efficient one. And what we see is on the off-taker side, a huge demand growing, I would say, every month. And there are still those off-takers which tell us, look, I wait for another 3 years, then you cut down the price by 30%. I said, we will not, because if nobody goes with us, the price will stay at the same because the cost will stay at the same. But the number of potential off-takers which we could sign off right now, they are saying there is a huge demand and I'm now buying myself in if you get me something from your next phases, because I know that I will take advantage of the new technologies you have in place, the learning curve, and a little bit compare that with the offshore wind industry. When we started with that, and at that point of time was vice president of the German Offshore Foundation, we built Alpha Ventus. And people told me, well, you will produce offshore wind power at almost no subsidy price, just the market price. I would have put him into jail because he seems to be very stupid. But that's what happened. And that is the same what happens with renewable molecules. So, but we need to start. The offshore industry also has not waited until the end of time. So we have not waited. That is why we built it, and we continue to do so. So that is our message to the Europeans. Either they get it or they don't. Up to them.
Yeah, and I think it's very clear from Arcadia's side, we're using, commercially proven technology that we're downscaling. The gas to liquids process, concerning the syngas to Fischer-Tropsch and then refining has been around for a long time. There's several plants, large, 200,000 barrel a day plants operating in the world today using the same technology. We're just substituting the natural gas with green hydrogen and captured CO2. So the process exists. So this is important to say. And then, of course, that using that process with green hydrogen and CO2 is more expensive than crude oil-based fuels today. But over time, as people are inventing new ways of producing hydrogen cheaper with electrolysis maturity, at new ways to combine the hydrogen and the CO2 in a syngas generation, those costs will start to come down. But if we wait and wait and wait, we're going to be 2050 and just waiting around. So what we need companies like HIF, Arcadia, and even Eni to start producing these e-fuels today, and then still encouraging these other companies that are doing some R&D on new innovations. Let's give them some funding also, so that now we have an operating e-fuels plant. We can easily insert new technology into an existing plant to help scale that up faster and faster. That's the right approach, but we need to do both pathways.
Yeah, thank you very much, Amy. There is another question from Alba directly to you. Maybe you can answer that in the chat. And there is also a question from Michael Sterner. The eFuel Alliance as a platform, of course, is also connecting people. Michael is a very distinguished scientist, and he's asking for data. So maybe that's could be also a question to the three panelists to answer in the chat, because peer-reviewed papers, of course, from science are always very important and highly appreciated here. Since we are actually coming to the end of our event, I would like to end with a short question to all the three of our panelists to wrap up, so to speak. And it would be actually just a quick overview, so to speak, when we see into the year of 2030, because most of the regulations we are discussing right now are heading towards 2030 targets, but also other time slots, so to speak. So taking into account the situation right now in Europe, but also into account the situation in other places of the world, which we discussed, of course, where do you think we will stand as an industry in 2030? I don't know, Luca, maybe you want to start, and also to wrap up the event.
Yeah, Ralph, not an easy question, because I
never.
mean, 2030 is tomorrow. When you, I mean, if you deal with investments and decisions about investments really tomorrow, and we already need to start and to think about that. So I don't want to be pessimistic and negative, but not, I mean, I wouldn't see 2030 to be very different from today. That 2030 could be the moment when, after 2030, hydrogen would start to ramp up in Europe. And that will be very important, because, I mean, we made several attempts in the past. We never made it. This time has to be the right time to do it. But again, in order to ramp up hydrogen, you need a market, so both supply and demand. We will probably, how to say, looking at our own company, be much stronger in producing biofuels, of course, for both road transport and aviation. But then we would need to look further ahead in order to see a real breakthrough. And I agree with what was said before. The role of R&D, technology innovation, will be crucial. We will need also new technologies to lead us to 2050, and we are investing a lot on that.
Amy?
Yeah, I agree. 2030 is around the corner and we need to get started now. It takes years to build these facilities. We need to get going. I think that in 2030, the world will be different. I believe that there will be a lot of companies, startup companies and also larger companies that have, made the transition into decarbonizing their operations. Hopefully the regulations will be in place by then and clear, and we'll all be up and running. But I'm confident that there's so much attention to this now, not just from the regulations and politicians, but industry, customers, individual consumers, that I'm very encouraged with the direction we're taking. We have a long way to go, because even in 2030, eFuels will just comprise just a small portion of the overall fuels market. But that just means we have a lot more to do in the future. So it's a very exciting time to be in the space. And, I look forward to seeing some of these projects reach the final investment decision and then get up and running.
With the exciting part, I can fully agree. Actually, also for me, it's very exciting to be part of this development because it's really interesting. Thorsten, please.
Yeah, well, a little bit echoing Amy, we are definitely in 2030 at a point where we have seen a lot of final investment decision, ramping up the electrolyzer capacity, which right now is about 500 megawatts by a huge factor. And the only question then is the EU ready to have the right framework in place in order to take advantage of that? Or is it all going to other countries and we will have really a problem with that? So I'm very optimistic in person always. And I'm very optimistic that our legislators in the EU will recognize that and will put all efforts in order to get us a legislative framework so that we can also take account of that. And perhaps a very last sentence, because there was asked in the chat, for us, like in Chile, it is always that country comes first. All the Chileans do need in that region, we will supply them with them. So we are building a whole ecosystem down in the Magallanes region. And only that what is too much will be exported. I think that is very important to clearly name that it is not that we go into countries, take away their goods, be it wind, be it sun, or be it anything else, and leave them alone. I think that is extremely important, because only then partnerships really work for the future. It is all about people, and I'm pretty sure that by 2030, we have seen that the Russian invasion, as bad as it is, has also, forgive me to say so, a positive effect that we strengthen arms to our partners around the world with whom we are really going to work together for a long period of time. And I think that will be understood by the European politicians. So in 2030, we have a lot of more partnerships around. I'm very optimistic that we can reach that point.
Yeah, thank you very much, especially also for mentioning the terrible war actually in Ukraine, since we are heading into a Christmas time where, especially for the people in Ukraine, most likely a war Christmas time. So on that note, I very much hope that we will get to an end of that terrible development as soon as possible. Yeah, we reached our time. Thank you very much to Amy, Luca, and Thorsten for participating in that event. I think it was a very interesting exchange on the current state of the Fit for 55 program. Also, thank you very much to Markus Pieper and Timo Wölken from the European Parliament to join and give us the perspective. I think it's clear that we will head now in a final discussion phase on the Fit for 55 program, which will deciding a lot about the developments until, for example, 2030, but also further. I would like especially thank my team and here Algara Castle, who actually organized the event. Algara, thank you very much for that. And as always, our distinguished ladies from Fulmidas who organized the event technically, as always, in a perfect manner. Thank you very much. Have a good pre-Christmas time, everybody. Actually, it's coming up very fast now. And have a good week and stay healthy, of course. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.